Hello, my name is Malcolm Vargas, also known as Ma Tai. I'm a paragliding instructor and author. Living in Taiwan for 30 years, the author of these two paragliding books, which you can download for free. I'm an FAI certified tandem pilot and instructor. I am one of only two pilots in Taiwan to receive their instructor's training abroad at Torrey Pines, California, USA. Flying for 17 years. I am probably the only person in the world to have made an in-depth study of how to select and open a paragliding takeoff zone. I have surveyed over 150 sites and opened a dozen myself. Priorities of site selection and development are as follows. Reduce risk and stress and prevent accidents for a wide range of pilots, including beginners through competition. Maximize the daily flight window, the annual flight season, and the number of pilots. Minimize environmental impact, cost, and the time to develop. Include and empower local community, all while respecting the local laws. Notice that pilot safety is number one. US HPA reports that 90% of accidents occur at the takeoff zone or the landing zone from turbulence or from the pilot failing to reach the landing zone. This is why pilot safety is the prime directive. Any decisions which compromise this should be revised. Because turbulence is concentrated close to the ground, we focus on these areas through careful, constant surveying of the airspace around and between the takeoff zone and the landing zone, while shaping, landscaping, and designing the airflow. Air currents cannot be seen, so we use windsocks, ribbons, flags, and smoke. We also do continuous safety test flights during the design process. This provides constant and essential feedback, much as a doctor during surgery monitors patient vital signs. Proper flight testing during development of a paragliding takeoff zone is essential to meet the priorities above by verifying that the proposed landing zone is within range, identifying sources of turbulence on the takeoff zone and landing zone, identifying which faces of a site can be used for takeoff, determining how to alter the contour of the takeoff zone, identifying daily thermal cycles, establishing safe flight paths to the landing zone, establishing emergency landing zones, identifying ways to expand site suitability for beginners as well as advanced pilots, and finding the sweet spot on the takeoff zone. The safety flight testing system provides necessary feedback during the development process in order to prevent mistakes which might cost time, money, property, and lives. Now, let's look at the case study, Sanlin Paragliding in Kaohsiung. The cost of this project was budgeted at 30 million NT dollars, roughly 1 million US dollars, in the year 2012. To date, the cost has gone over 40 million. The project proposal alone cost 3 million NT dollars, and it is still not finished. Even the basics have not been done. Pause the video to compare this cost and time comparison chart of similar projects. Notice that all except for two of these projects cost less than the project proposal alone for Sanlin project. Sanlin cost 4 times the next most expensive project, and it took 4 times longer to complete, and is still not safely flyable for beginner pilots. In the rest of the presentation, I will show you how the cost was artificially increased, the project delayed, the flight times reduced, and pilot risk increased. I will show you how early safety flight testing was subverted. I will show you how this flight testing could have prevented these many problems. The first property acquired was the Landing Zone 1 next to the Ta'ai village. This project was presented as an economic stimulus to the Morakot disaster refugee residents. Yet, to date, there has been no benefit to the residents whatsoever, and attempts to involve them in the project have been pushed aside. The land was forested originally, so the city had to pay a per tree fee to deforest it. 20-meter tall trees are planted upwind of the landing zone, creating turbulence, rendering half of the 4 acres unsafe. The field is too far away from the takeoff zone. Less than 10% of the flights can reach it. It was proposed for hot air ballooning, but the small size, nearness to residences and forests creates a safety hazard. This was not well thought out. Early flight safety testing would have prevented this. Landing Zone 2 is near Shaolin Village. It also is too far away. Less than one half of all flights could reach it. At 1.5 acres, it is also too small. Ground turbulence is created by the cliff on the west side and by the building and by a stand of trees. Thermal turbulence is generated by the pineapple field. Early flight safety tests could have prevented this. The landscape below the takeoff zone is rolling hills which create many problems. No place for emergency landings, increased turbulence, slower thermal development. So it is even more important to test fly and verify a landing zone before purchasing and landscaping. These two landing zones with respect to this takeoff zone were effectively a waste of time and money, nearly 80% of the budget. The last property acquired and landscaped was the takeoff zone. It should have been first. It was chosen because of the good slope angle and it afforded faces to 3 winds: southwest, west, and north. Also, upslope, it could later be expanded to allow easier takeoff. In the year 2005, the farmer had excavated to create 3 flat steps, which interrupt the smooth airflow on the north and west faces, leaving a smooth airflow only on the southwest and west-southwest faces. These problems could easily be remedied by restoring the original landscape and creating a smooth takeoff in southwest, west, and north directions. But this is not what was done. Instead, a cliff was created on the southwest face, thus creating a turbulent rotor on the only remaining smooth airflow. The west face was left, a flat step creating turbulence, disabling that direction. The north face was also rendered a cliff, creating turbulence, disabling that direction. They failed to expand the takeoff radius to the potential southwest, west, and north, and instead reduced the radius to only a small west-southwest direction and created additional turbulence on the takeoff zone which endangers the pilots already flying there. This greatly limited the flyable time of day, the acceptable wind directions and wind speeds, and greatly reduced the flyable season. It increased the stress risk for beginners, intermediate, and tandem pilots. It effectively set up the project for accidents and for limited flight time. Early safety test flights could have prevented this. This retaining wall was not part of the project. During the landscaping, a visiting pilot from Taiwan convinced the backhoe operator that he was the site manager and for 4 days supervised the backhoe operator to build this wall outside the leased land. The forestry department director was disrespected, so they canceled the lease. The project was in court for the next 2 years trying to enforce the lease. The backhoe operator had to pay a heavy fine. The pilot immediately fled to the other side of the island and did not return for a year. And when he did, he created more havoc. The wall was not necessary, and the opportunity to expand the site was effectively blocked. Ultimately, the backhoe was on the takeoff zone for 2 weeks doing all the wrong things. Where it could have increased the flight window and made the site safer by restoring the original condition of the land. Instead, it reduced the daily flying window and flying season and increased the risk factor by creating turbulence on all sides, violated the land contract, and delayed the project for 4 years. Again, this could have been prevented by flight safety testing in the initial stages of this project. The original land lease from the forestry department failed to allow landscaping of the slope directly below the takeoff zone. Trees on that slope were directly in the flight path and needed to be removed, and other trees created turbulence which caused wing deflations immediately after takeoff. This failing in the original contract created the danger and set up the project for failure. Attempts to remove this danger were deliberately frustrated by anonymous reports to the forestry and erosion departments. Proper safety flight testing during the initial stages of this project would have prevented this. Let's look at this list of priorities again. They are a matter of simple practicality. They're common sense. Dozens of people in Taiwan and thousands around the world have opened takeoff zones successfully at minimal cost, in short time, and with no legal issues. A long list of bad decisions violated the Prime Directive repeatedly, as well as all other priorities, wasting time, money, and land, reducing the flight day and the flight season, delaying the project. Let's look at how these bad decisions were made. The left side of this chart is a standard operational procedure sequence for meeting the priorities listed above. To the right of that is the sequence which was followed by the sound in development. Notice these sequences are reversed. If the information from the flight testing had been used during the excavation and landscaping, during the selection of the landing zones, thousands of hours could have been saved, acres of land could have been left untouched, and millions of NT dollars could have been used for far more practical purposes. Here's a summary of the current flight testing process. At first, I agreed to participate in this testing, but when I realized it was merely a ruse, I declined to legitimize it by my participation. Here are some of the problems with the testing process. It should have been done during the early stage of the project. If it had, the information would assure its success. Instead, it was deferred to the end of the project to assure its failure. Here's a suitable metaphor. During surgery, they have disconnected the patient monitor. Then, after surgery, they reconnected it to confirm that the patient is dead. It prefers bureaucratic convenience over genuine safety concerns. The timing and fee schedules prioritize milking the government money over testing efficiency. The test makes presumptions one would expect from a novice or from someone who is using inside knowledge to deceive an outsider. It presumes that if the site is safe for coaches, it is also safe for beginner and intermediate pilots. That is patently wrong. It presumes the weather a year in advance. That's ridiculous. It ignores valuable information which is freely available online. And that is why there is no precedent for this kind of flight testing whatsoever. The test invalidates itself and is self-handicapping. The test manager is collecting data from pilots outside of the test. Initial test flights go to the lee side, cross-country, and to high elevations. This is not where the dangers are for opening a new site. The hazards are in the immediate vicinity of the takeoff zone and landing zone and airspace in between, information which is already available online. The testers are acquiring the paragliding site at Sabotage. This represents a conflict of interest. Is it possible that all of these errors were engineered in order to disable business competition from sound in sight? A genuine and essential safety flight testing would recognize that 90% of all accidents occur at the takeoff zone or landing zone, and so as to prevent these accidents. It should have been done before any land was purchased to verify that the landing zone is close enough to the takeoff zone, to explore safe routes between the takeoff zone and landing zone, to find emergency landings, and to identify house thermals and sinks. It should be scheduled by wind speed and direction, not according to the calendar, and at the convenience of pilots and the weather, not the manager. It should be organized by a qualified paragliding instructor using pilots who already have experience flying that site. I have voiced my concerns repeatedly. I've objected to all the above decisions through my windows to the government. I was systematically and deliberately marginalized. My advice and suggestions were habitually ignored, and the content of my books was used to handicap, hinder, delay, drive up the cost, and otherwise sabotage this project. Again, I remind you that 90% of all accidents occur at the takeoff zone or the landing zone. Also, Taiwan has one of the highest accident rates in the world, the lowest growth rate, the highest attrition rate. Knowing this, why were the takeoff zone and landing zone treated so carelessly by contractor consultants who are supposedly knowledgeable, experienced professionals? Clearly, they are not. Or they deliberately sabotage this project. You should also note that Sabotage has the highest accident rate in Taiwan, the highest number of legal actions, the longest period of shutdown time, and the least amount of participation from the immediate surrounding community. How can it be that both Kaohsiung City Development Office and Kaohsiung Education Department have no oversight, that they have not the common sense to compare similar projects? This project has been an abysmal failure by any standard, a perfect example of how not to open a paragliding site. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. To end on a high note, here are my recommendations to salvage this project. Immediately revise the Forestry Department land contract to assign responsibility for the takeoff zone and the slope directly below it to the Sunland Paragliding Club. Immediately contour the takeoff zone to its original year 2004 condition, enabling takeoff in the three directions, southwest, west, and north, as per the accompanying diagram. This is what should have been done on day one. Implement a community model for local participation and support. This is essential to a sustainable ecotourism design. Success depends on community integration. Empower and subsidize the Sanlin Paragliding Club to do a membership drive from Da'ai, Xiaolin, Sanlin, Meinong, Qishan, Jiaxian, Neimen, Liugui, and the other surrounding rural communities. You can do this through the community college network. Move the landing zone to the area in front of Dimu Miao. About 1 to 2 hectares would be 1.7 kilometers away from the takeoff zone. Begin immediate investigation into the possibility of subterfuge, misappropriation of funds, conflict of interest in this case. Do thorough background checks, including emails, text messages, and phone calls, and financial records. Paragliding is a magnet for economic development. Waiao, Puli, Fonglin, Luye all testify to this. So why would someone sabotage this paragliding project? I don't have the answer. But in looking at this at many levels raises more important questions. Is paragliding a political football? Are there double agents in Kaohsiung city government? Or are the city government employees so naive? Are there people who don't want the rural and minority communities to improve? Does someone want to make Mayor Chen Zhi lose face to shame the Kaohsiung government? What better way than to sabotage this project? Has someone in paragliding elsewhere been historically overbilling the government, so they pad this budget to cover their tracks? Is someone bidding on the BOT at Saijia and see Sanlin as a threat to a monopoly there? Has Saijia already been systematically sabotaged? Does it merely have the image of success but no actual benefit for the local indigenous communities? Who are the players in that debacle? Why does South Taiwan, population 6 million, have only 15 active pilots? Why is it that with so many mountains there's only one site in South Taiwan? Is someone in another paragliding site afraid that Kaohsiung paragliding might overshadow them, steal their market? Saijia, Puli, Taidong. If Sanlin opens only 40 minutes from the airport, pilots, tandem passengers, and spectators don't need to go around the island to Taidong. Will this reduce their advantage? The paragliding community in Taiwan is divided into two groups. One, open-minded, humble, older pilots, and their next generation pilots who study, share knowledge, improve safety, build a sustainable and growing knowledge and economic community. They are mostly in the north of Taiwan, growing in numbers, and don't lean on government subsidies. Then there's a small group of first-generation older pilots who learned by the seat of their pants, held back information and development, used their student pilots as white mice. Their focus is short-term personal gain. They have the passenger mentality. Using a facade of professionalism to deceive the government officials, they feel they are entitled to milk as much money as they can while providing no long-term benefit. They feel threatened by someone who actually knows something, who wants genuine improvement. They pull the hind leg, set up barriers, use insider knowledge to deceive outsiders, gossip, slander, and manipulate the law to destroy what others try to build. They undermine the fabric of society and disable attempts at long-term sustainable growth for rural and minority, Hakka and Aboriginal communities. And they hinder Taiwan as an international paragliding tourist destination. Am I merely pointing to the elephant in the room? I do for free in rural communities what they overcharge the government to do. I do it better and cheaper. Maybe some developer would hire me, you think? Instead, I face constant threat. In Taidong, when I tried to open sites in the local indigenous communities, my family and business was threatened. Someone tried to frame me for a crime that I did not commit. When I was opening the Tiger Breath site in Puli, my house was broken into, my equipment stolen. My takeoff zone was set on fire in an attempt to frame me for arson. a rogue journalist was paid to do a dark story on me. The good judgment of local government and community saved the day. Now, that site is thriving, a model for paragliding in Asia, and 2 other excellent sites have opened beside it. In Shizuxiang, someone violently smashed the electric power box and porta potty, and after 10 years of worry-free flying permitted by the township, suddenly someone is making anonymous calls to provoke one policeman to harass the pilots there. And here in Sanlin, the Sanlin Paragliding Club formation was sabotaged. While I was away, one of these older pilots who just got his coach's license disregarded pilot-coach decorum and professional courtesies, put my students' safety at risk, was the cause of the first tandem injury and the first destruction of public property using a homemade towing device, the same person responsible for the illegal wall on the takeoff zone. I have tried to resolve these issues through quiet and diplomatic channels for years. Failing that, I have decided to go public and see if any of the local journalists or local government representatives have the courage to deal with it. Now, I'm placing myself at great risk of retribution. I can accept that.